17th Sunday in Ordinary Time.
A reading from the second book of Kings. A man came from Baal Shalisha, bringing to Elisha, the man of God, 20 barley loaves made from the firstfruits, and fresh grain in the ear. Elisha said, "Give it to the people to eat." But his servant objected. "How can I set this before 100 people?" Elisha insisted, "Give it to the people to eat. For thus says the Lord, they shall eat, and there shall be some left over." And when they had eaten, there was some left over, as the Lord had said. The word of the Lord.
A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Ephesians. Brothers and sisters, I, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to live in a manner worthy of the call you have received, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another through love, striving to preserve the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace, one body and one Spirit, as you were also called to the one hope of your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. The word of the Lord.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs he was performing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. When Jesus raised his eyes and saw that a large crowd was coming to him, he said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" He said this to test him, because he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 200 days' wages worth of food would not be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good are these for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people recline." Now there was a great deal of grass in that place, so the men reclined, about 5,000 in number. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much of the fish as they wanted. When they had had their fill, he said to his disciples, "Gather the fragments left over so that nothing will be wasted." So they collected them and filled 12 wicker baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves that had been more than they could eat. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, "This is truly the prophet, the one who is to come into the world." Since Jesus knew that they were going to come and carry him off to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain alone. The Gospel of the Lord.
The first reading comes from 2 Kings 4, 42 to 44. This is the story of how Elisha was able to multiply bread that had been brought to him in order to feed all the people. It's obviously a preparation for the Gospel reading in which we'll hear about the miraculous multiplication of loaves and fish that Jesus performs according to John. The second reading is from Ephesians 4, 1 to 6. In this passage, the author calls upon the community to live with humility, gentleness, patience, in spite of the fact that the author is a prisoner for the Lord. Remember, Ephesians probably wasn't written by Paul, but it's written as if it were written by Paul. Therefore, it speaks about his imprisonment. And instead of worrying about his own difficulties, he talks about the need for unity within the community. They are one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all. So they should manifest that oneness in the way they live, and in the way that they treat each other. The Gospel is from John 6, 1 to 15. Now in Matthew and Mark there are 2 multiplications of loaves and fish, while in Luke and John there's only 1. In this multiplication, the prefiguring of the Eucharist is very strongly emphasized. There are phrases like the fact that Jesus gave thanks. It also says he gave thanks in the other Gospels, but in those Gospels, the authors use a word eudokeo, which is a perfectly good Greek word, which means giving thanks. This author wanted to emphasize the Eucharistic dimension of what's happening here, so the author uses the word Eucharistein. Then at the end of the passage we hear that they're to gather up the fragments. That's a phrase that's taken from the Didache, the teaching of the 12 Apostles, which was one of the earliest liturgical books in the Christian community, dating sometime between 70 and 130 AD. It specifically says that at the end of the Eucharistic celebration, the people were to gather up the fragments of that which had been consecrated. There's a large crowd who have followed Jesus, and Jesus asked Philip, "Where can we get enough food to feed them?" Now Jesus already knows what he's going to do. This is typical of the Gospel of John. He knows everything before he asks it. He's simply testing the disciples. They bring forth a young boy who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Now notice they're barley loaves. This is the only Gospel which specifically mentions barley loaves. Barley was the food of the poor, so this is all the kid had. But 5 plus 2 is 7. 5 loaves, 2 fish, that makes 7 objects. 7 is the perfect number. Even before Jesus multiplies this, it's already somehow perfect. Jesus takes it, gives thanks, has the people recline upon the green grass. The mention of the green grass is obviously an allusion to Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In verdant pastures he gives me repose. Jesus is the good shepherd, satisfying the needs of his people. He gives them the bread and the fish, and they have 12 wicker baskets left over, 12 for the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, the response of the people is that they want to make him king, but he flees away from them because that's not his mission. His mission is to nourish them, and he does that by the outpouring of love that's especially expressed on the cross. So even as this is a foreshadowing of the Eucharistic meal, it's also a foreshadowing of the cross, where Jesus will give thanks by giving up his life out of love for us and for the Father. and may God bless us.